All right. This is the review session. For those of you watching at home, I just gave away a few details on the exam. Let me close the door. All right, Andres is coming. Andres is coming back, so I won't close the door. All right. The exam. It is 3 hours, 75 multiple choice questions. I mentioned throughout the quarter that these questions will be very similar to questions that you took on the quizzes. As I made each quiz, I grabbed a parallel exam question, and what I did this afternoon is I just put all those in an exam, pared it down to 75 questions. So looking at the quiz questions will allow you to know exactly what you need to study. So that's the good news. The bad news, for those of you watching at home that I went over a minute ago with the class, is that as you know with these questions, you can't just memorize the questions. You need to understand what lever is being operated. Is this increasing, decreasing? How does the supply and demand work together? So I want you to really understand the concepts. So look at those questions, think about answering it, make sure you really understand the concept. Because by the time you get to 60, 70 questions on the exam, you'll be exhausted, and you'll be like, I know this is exactly the same as the question we had on the quiz, but I just can't figure it out. So we will go over tonight the big concepts, and then I would suggest you, maybe fairly soon, I don't know if I mentioned on the video, but or mentioned before you got in, Andres, the exam is available right now. You could take it now, anytime between now and next week. Just before the end of class next week.
Before the end of class next week?
Yes. So you've got a week to take it at your leisure. So I would concentrate on what we go over tonight. Go home, study the quiz questions, and don't just memorize the quiz questions, but really know those quiz questions. And when you're feeling like you're good on that, get some rest, then take the exam when you're fresh. All right, yes?
Well, good news is just it's going to be the topics focused on the quizzes, right?
Yeah. It's just like I said, when I made each quiz, I pulled a question and quizzed you on it. And while I was doing that, I said, let me get one that's exactly the same concept. Different wording, upside down rather than left, right, that kind of thing. All right, so we'll just go through class one by one and see if you have any questions. Ready? So, supply, demand, class 1. All right, I think the main thing here is the shifts in supply and demand. So, we have demand decreases as price gets higher and higher. Oh, wait a minute. Quantity demanded as price gets higher and higher. I'm not off to a good start here. Wait a minute. All right, so as price gets lower and lower, demand increases. All right, because people want to buy more at a lower price. As price gets higher and higher, supply increases. The key thing I would discuss on this chapter or this class are the shifts in demand and the shifts in supply. So let's skip right ahead to those. All right, a shift in demand curve is caused by a change in number of buyers in the market, tastes and preferences, incomes, expectations of buyer, prices of related goods. Let's look at those one by one. Number of buyers. So here we have a demand curve. As price gets lower and lower, quantity demanded is increased. So if we have more buyers in the market, more people demanding, at the same price, there's going to be more quantity demanded. All right. How about taste and preferences? All of a sudden, people really like buying popcorn. So at any price, demand is going to increase. Income. All right, there's two things with income: normal goods and inferior goods. Normal goods, if you have more money, at any one price, you are going to demand more. So we're going to get a shift to the right. Inferior goods, like bus tickets, grade, low grade hamburgers. If you have more income, you're going to buy less of those. Expectations of buyers. So if you expect the price to increase in the future at any price, you're going to demand more. If you expect the price to go down in the future at any price, you're going to buy less. Prices of related goods. So if a substitute decreases in price, so what's a substitute? So suppose airfare, right? Airfare, and a substitute for airfare is high-speed trains. So the price of high-speed trains goes way down. What happens to the demand for airfare? It goes down too, right? Right. So the price of train goes way down. People are like, I don't want to fly. I want the train. So demand for airfare goes down as well. That's a substitute good. Complementary good. Goods that go together. So the price of DVDs and the price of a DVD player. So the price of DVD players goes way down. What happens to the demand for DVD? What did I say? The price of DVD players goes way down. What happens to the price of DVDs? Or demand for DVDs? Goes up, right? So the complement goes way down. I can buy DVD players very cheaply. So that makes me want to buy more DVDs. So inverse relationship with complementary goods. All right, we're good there? Supply. Let's look at what happens in terms of shifts on a supply curve. All right, things that cause a shift in supply curve: number of sellers in the market, technology, resource prices, taxes and subsidies, expectations of producers, prices of other goods and services the firm could produce. Okay, number of sellers in the market. So again, supply is as we increase in price, suppliers are willing to supply a lot more quantity. So we have an initial supply curve. All of a sudden, a bunch of additional suppliers get into this market. So we have the same number of suppliers facing the same opportunities and pitfalls potentially. They're just more factories. They're going to sell more at the same price. Number of sellers increases. Supply at any price shifts to the right. Direct relationship. Technology. So we have some technology. For the same price, we're able to produce more DVDs. Or for a lower price, we're able to produce the same number of DVDs. So supply shifts to the right, increase in quantity at any one price. Resource prices. So if the price of rubber goes down, then the suppliers of tires are able to supply more at any one price. Any particular price, they're able to supply more quantity for that price. Resource prices goes down, supply goes up. So inverse. Stop me if I'm going too fast. Taxes and subsidies. So all of a sudden you have a big tax on cigarettes. Right? Producers were supplying at this price, this much. All of a sudden the producers need to pay a cigarette tax. $2 a pack, $4 a pack, something large like that. So at that price, at that same price, any given price, suppliers are going to supply less. So that is a inverse relationship with taxes. Now, how about a subsidy? Suppose all of a sudden the government says, for every pack of cigarettes you sell, we'll pay you $2. Kind of crazy to think about it. But if they did, then at any price, producers would produce more. Producers would sell more quantity. So inverse relationship with taxes, direct relationship with subsidies. Good. All right, expectations of producers. So if suppliers think that the price of oil is going to go down in the future, what would they do? They would produce less of it. So, is that right? Oil companies anticipate a substantial rise in future oil prices. Oh, yeah, so suppliers think that the price of oil is going to go up in the future, so they're going to hold on to it. So if they think the price of oil is going up, let's sell less at any given price. Inverse relationship. Okay. Price of other goods and services. So if I'm producing tires, and I could shift that around and produce, say, plastic and rubber chairs, if the price of plastic and rubber chairs goes up, I'm going to produce fewer tires. So the higher the price of the other thing I could produce, the less of the current good I'm going to produce. So if I have more options, I'm going to produce less. If I have better options, I'm going to produce less of the initial good. Okay. Good there. Make sense? Got it? All right, so we've got equilibrium price. One thing I wanted to mention on chapter 4 is just the price ceiling and the price floor. So let's take a look at supply and demand. Okay, what's going on here with a rent ceiling? This is a price ceiling. What happens if the government imposes a price ceiling? You can only charge $800 for one bedrooms in Manhattan. Sounds good initially, but the problem is the suppliers are only going to supply that much. The renters are going to want that much, so we have a shortage. Similarly, if we put a price floor, such as minimum wage, all right, and I'll warm us up again here to the labor supply and demand curve. So when we're looking at labor, this supply curve, these are workers. These are workers saying, the higher wage you pay, the more we'll work. And the demand curve are the producers. The lower wage is, the more we will demand. So if we have a minimum wage, we've got the workers, the supply, saying, we'll work. And we've got the producers saying, well, we can only hire so much. So we have a surplus, unemployment. Good? All right. For systems of market failure, so when this supply-demand thing doesn't work, all right, we should just intuitively know about these. One, lack of competition. And we need competition for the supply and demand to be efficient and to work. 2, externalities. Does anyone remember what externalities are? These are benefits or costs borne by a third party. For example, pollution. And I'm building cars and I'm selling them to you, but the whole rest of society has to deal with this pollution. So if that's not incorporated in the supply and demand curve, then that's not going to give us an efficient amount of cars that should be produced for the best good of society. A positive externality, the example was a vaccine. It's a vaccine for a disease that benefits people who don't get the vaccine. So essentially, we're not going to have an efficient equilibrium if there's people who are not involved in the payment of this, who are benefiting from it or bearing some cost. So that's an externality. We'll look at the graphs for that quickly. And then public goods. Anyone remember what a public good is? National defense, highways. All right, this is something that everyone would benefit from, and it's impossible to exclude people from. I think we talked about the example, a missile defense system. All right, if David wants to spend $6 billion on a missile defense system, it's going to be pretty much impossible for him only to protect himself. Everyone else is going to benefit from it. Everyone else is going to free ride. So David's going to be like, no way am I spending that $6 billion. So no one spends it. So this is something where we have a market failure if we just rely on supply and demand. So we need a government. We need someone to say, all right, I'm going to collect taxes. Everybody's going to benefit from this. And we're going to provide those public goods. All right, so public goods, that's pretty easy. Lack of competition, that's pretty easy. Income inequality, we don't really need to talk about that. It's definitely an important discussion, but I'm not going to test you too much on that or at all on that. But let's look at that graph for externalities. So remember this one for pollution. Okay, so here we have the equilibrium without regulation. We have a supply of cars, we have a demand for cars. The problem is the company, the suppliers, are polluting the environment and the buyers are not paying for it. So what we need to do, one way to do it, is to impose a pollution tax. So at any price, right, the suppliers are going to provide a little bit more, or at any quantity, the producers are going to have to pay a little bit more. So as a result, the supply curve is going to shift to the left. We're going to produce a little bit less, and the consumers are going to pay a little bit more. So, and that's all economic theorists want. They want the people who are actually involved in this transaction to pay for it, and they want an efficient equilibrium where everyone is bearing the costs that they're benefiting from, and then they can vote for with their dollars and say, well, will provide the best, most good for everyone. Right? As long as costs are fully incorporated, we're good. And then there's a positive externality. We use that example of a vaccination. So, all right, here's the inefficient equilibrium. At this point, we've got a certain number of vaccinations, a certain price. But the thing is, people who are not vaccinated are getting a benefit. And that's not incorporated into this supply and demand curve. So, if it were, then producers would be providing more of these vaccinations, and we would be fully capturing the value that everyone is reaping. So, the government says one of two things. I'm going to give you a subsidy. I'm going to pay you to provide more vaccinations. Or maybe I'm going to require citizens to get a vaccination. So that pushes demand. Consumers pay a little bit more for this. They pay for the benefit that is established, the benefit that's there. Okay. Sound good? All right. I think that's all I wanted out of this one. Let's move on.
Professor, are these all the PowerPoint that you have online?
Yes.
That we already discussed, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. We're not pulling out new PowerPoints at this point. All right. Let me here. Put this back. All right. Class 1, Class 2. All right. Elasticity. All right, remember elasticity of demand? So we've got a chalkboard. I don't need a chalkboard. We've got elasticity of demand, percent change in quantity demanded divided by percent change in price. So remember, price is in the denominator. So if I increase that by, say, 5%, what's going to happen in the numerator? Is this going to decrease quantity demanded by like 20%? All right, if I with a small increase in price, if I have a monstrous decrease in quantity, we call that product elastic. If there's an increase in price and a very, very small increase in quantity, or very, very small reaction decrease in quantity, we call that inelastic. And I remember elastic, pull out my chalk here. We've got quantity and price. I remember, so if this is a demand curve, remember inelastic, it's kind of a straight up and down line for the demand curve. I remember that it's like an uppercase I. I don't know if that analogy helps you. So a large increase in price would result in a very small decrease in quantity. And conversely, I remember elastic demand curve, more of a straight line. It looks like the middle line of an E, of a capital E. That's elastic. So if I change price a tiny bit, quantity demanded is going to change a huge amount. All right, so we've got this midpoint formula. I don't know if you remember, there's a weird thing that happens, if you start with the change, the beginning change or the end change, you get a completely different answer. So economists say use the midpoint theorem to calculate elasticity of demand. So just circle this in your slides, midpoint theorem. All right, elasticity, inelastic, elastic, unitary elastic means percentage change in quantity, there's an equal change in demand. So let's see, let's just think about this for 1 second. So if a product is elastic, that means it's going to be very responsive to a small change in price. So what should you do to make more money, to make more revenue, if you're selling an elastic product? So if you decrease the price, what's going to happen to quantity demanded? Very elastic. What's going to increase quantity demanded? But is it going to increase a lot because it's elastic? Yeah, because it's elastic. It's think elastic like rubber band. All right, so it's going to snap. So decrease in price, crazy increase in quantity. And that increase in quantity is going to offset the decrease in price. You're going to sell more, make more money. If you have an inelastic product, so if you increase price a lot, then quantity demanded is not going to change because maybe you've got a product that everyone wants for whatever reason. In that case, you increase price because people are going to buy it anyway because it's an inelastic product.
That was the EpiPen example that you were giving.
Exactly. And what happened to that guy? Is he in jail yet?
Yeah.
For some other reason. Not charging so much for the EpiPen. He's in jail for some other, potentially going to be in jail for some other reason. All right. Okay, so this perfectly elastic. All right, notice it looks like the middle of an E. We also have perfectly inelastic. Looks like an uppercase I. All right. Yes. Oh, okay. Let's go over these 3 things. Factors that influence demand elasticity. Availability of substitutes. If there are no substitutes, like say the EpiPen, that's going to be a very inelastic product. If there are plentiful substitutes, that's going to be a very elastic product. Share of budget of the share of the budget on the product, or how much people spend in terms of the share of their budget. If I spend a large percentage of my budget on some product, and that product changes in price, I'm going to notice. And that's going to be an elastic product. If that's a tiny percentage of my budget, I gave the example, these little pre-packaged peeled garlic cloves. They cost $2, $3, but they save me like 15 minutes, and my hands don't smell like garlic after I chop them. So if those could double in price, and I wouldn't even notice. I would call that an inelastic product because it's a small share of my budget. Adjustment to price over time. So as the producers increase price, it might be inelastic, meaning my quantity demanded doesn't change very much initially. But over time, I figure out how to work around it. I begin to be more and more annoyed. They've increased the price. I find substitutes, and that product becomes elastic. Make sense? All right. So I think I managed my way through that well, but you might even just see on my face, I'm like, inelastic, elastic. I would go through that same process yourself. So more substitutes, inelastic, less elastic. Just make sure you've got that down, and you'll be good to go. All right. Production costs. Okay, now we're going to look at some cost curves. Let's recollect economic profit. Do we remember what economic profit is? So economic profit is different from accounting profit. Economic profit incorporates opportunity costs. So economic profit is total revenue minus our explicit costs, the costs we actually pay, and our implicit costs. That would be money I could have made somewhere else, and I gave up the opportunity to make money somewhere else. Or I've got my whole basement is now my production office, and before I could have rented that out to someone else. So economic profit incorporates all those implicit costs and the actual cash, the explicit costs. And we call those together the total opportunity costs. And we look at economic profit as economists. And one definition that is important to that is what we call a normal profit, when economic profit is zero. All right? If economic profit is more than zero, if you're making more producing these funny little gadgets than you could be making going back and working for your accounting firm, all your accounting firm buddies, they're going to say, I'm going to start producing that funny little gadget, and they're going to drive the price down till where you're making a normal profit. Normal profit means economic profit is zero. All right. Production function, we know fixed costs, variable costs. Okay, let's look at this marginal product curve real quickly, and then that will get us into the cost curves. With marginal product, we have that law of diminishing returns concept. So if we have in the short term a fixed factory, a fixed space, fixed HR, fixed resources, we hire one worker to help us. That worker is able to produce an additional 10 units. The second worker, that worker is able to produce an additional, I guess this goes down pretty quickly. So as we add labor, all right, the first worker is able to produce a lot more, and then a little bit more, and then that third worker, the space is getting really crowded. Now we have to take turns. It actually goes down. All right, so we may be producing a little bit more, but the extra that I add gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So law of diminishing returns. So I've got a factory. I hire Stephanie to start building stuff. All of a sudden I get 10 more units produced. I bring David in. All of a sudden I get an extra 7 units produced. So now I'm at 17 total. I bring Andres in. Now he adds an extra 4, so that's 21 total. So the amount I'm producing goes up and up, but each person I add makes less and less of an overall contribution. So we have the law of diminishing returns. And how that plays into our analysis is when we get to these cost curves. All right, let's look at this one. So here we've got cost per unit and we've got quantity. So as we're producing more and more, what happens to the cost per unit? Let's direct our attention to the marginal cost curve. That's the first thing we're going to look at, and the marginal cost curve dictates how everything else works. So, initially, you can see as I'm producing more and more units, the cost for each of those units goes down, right? So, I add Stephanie, she produces 10, and actually I don't think that was the best example I gave. So I add Stephanie, she produces 10 units. I add David, together they produce 22 units. So because they're able to hold the metal together, work together, cheer each other up, whatever, together they produce more. All right, and then I add Andres, and they only produce 29. So he adds a little extra, but we get a diminishing return. So cost per unit goes down up into a point where we run out of space, we get diminishing returns, and then as we produce more and more, the cost for producing one more unit, the marginal cost, is the cost of producing one more unit, goes up and up and up. All right, so we're good with that? Producing more units, initially we get some synergies, and then we get diminishing returns, marginal cost goes up and up and up. Okay, so the average variable cost, the marginal cost hits that at its minimum point. So for every additional unit, there's a variable cost for that. And as my marginal cost is lower than that average variable cost, I'm pulling the average variable cost down. But once my marginal cost crosses that line, I'm pulling my variable cost on an average basis up. Same thing with the average total cost. All right, if my marginal cost is lower than that curve, I'm pulling it down. If my marginal cost is above that curve, I'm pulling it up. So the marginal cost curve hits the average total cost and average variable cost at the lowest point. And don't worry about this average fixed cost. I'll explain it briefly. That's just you buy a factory here, so you have this fixed cost, and as you produce more units, it just gets lower and lower on an average basis. But the main ones are the marginal cost, and the average variable cost, and the average total cost. All right, we're good there? Excellent. All right, now, so this is in the short run. But what if I decide, hey, you know what? If I build a bigger factory, I could produce at a lower average total cost. If I decide that, then I'm going to do that. And I'm going to be able to produce more. I'm going to be able to shift this average total cost over here to where its lowest point is when I'm producing 12 units. Wherever I can get the average total cost at its lowest point, that's what I'm going to produce, or where I'm going to produce. And we saw that in this curve. These are short-run average costs, these red ones, and then we have a long-run average cost. Wherever, in the long run, I can produce any size of factory. And I'm going to find the optimal size factory to have my average cost be as low as possible. And we learned these terms: economies of scale, constant return scales, diseconomies of scale. So if I have a small factory, somebody might tell me, you have some economies of scale here. You can scale this up and you'll produce at a lower average cost. So guess what? I'm going to start scaling this up. And then we have a point where we just call it constant returns to scale. I could produce a factory any size here and it would be at the lowest possible. And then it gets to be a certain point where you just have too big of a factory. It's just, you don't have the same personality anymore. Workers don't have the same enthusiasm working in a plant of 5,000 people. So my average cost would go up. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to be at the lowest possible point in long run average cost. Good? Okay. And that's going to lead us into how all this works in perfect competition. So we'll look at these cost curves in just a perfect competition theoretical sense. A large number of small firms, homogeneous, the same product. It's easy for anyone to exit and enter this market. So what happens with these curves? We have a market, supply and demand sets a price. And each firm is a price taker in perfect competition. And some other models we'll talk about, the firm has some say in the price. But in perfect competition, the price is set by the whole industry, supply and demand, and the firm is just a price taker. Okay, but the firm does decide how many units to produce. And how do they decide, Stephanie? Yes, and MC we just went over is the marginal cost to produce one more unit. And what's marginal revenue? Revenue we get for producing that extra unit. Usually it's just price. And in perfect competition, it's just the price that is set. When we're a monopolist, we may have some control over this, but usually we can just think of this as just price, marginal revenue. The revenue we get for producing one more unit, and we want to produce all the way up until it costs us, we could get one more bit of revenue, because that's less than the cost we have to produce. So we'll keep producing up until this point. Let's put this on our cost curves. Okay, so this red line is our marginal cost. So remember, we've got some law of diminishing returns here. In the short run, as we add more and more workers, it's going to be less and less efficient, and then our marginal cost is going to go up. Our average variable cost is going to cross, we're going to cross that line at the slowest point, same average total cost. We're going to produce all the way up until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And then how much profit did we make? Well, that's our average total cost for producing that number of units. And the difference between that and the price, marginal revenue for each of those units, times the number of units that we produce. So this is our profit. Now, remember, when our friends from the accounting firm that we used to work at, when they see us making this economic profit, which means higher than a normal profit, what are they going to do? I can do that. I'm going to open up something in my garage too. So they get into the market and they drive the price down. They eliminate this economic profit. And we're just earning a normal profit. Similar to what we could be earning if we go back to the accounting firm. And then, of course, over the long run, we adjust this average cost curve to where we can have the lowest average cost based on the size of the firm we decide to build. All right. And I honestly don't remember if there's a quiz question about this, but there's, if the marginal revenue, if the price is lower than the lowest point on our average variable cost curve, then we never even start producing. All right, so as we're producing more and more, we're decreasing the variable cost per unit, but it never even averages out to be lower than the actual cost, the actual price of the product. So we say our supply curve is our marginal cost curve above our average variable cost. And then this is my supply curve, and then someone else who's selling the same thing, they have a similar supply curve, and we add all those supply curves together, and we get the industry supply curve. It's the marginal cost curve above the average variable cost curve. Make sense? All right. From short run supply curve, marginal cost curve above the minimum point of the average variable cost curve. And these are just different models. You see the red line is still our marginal cost curve. We will produce all the way up until that equals the price, the marginal revenue. These are just 3 different points of where the price could be. All right. Industry supply curve is everybody's marginal cost curve added together. Normal profit, minimum necessary to keep. What's normal profit again? It's where economic profits are 0. All right, so we will continue to produce as long as we're making a normal profit, and in the long run, all our friends will jump in and eat away any economic profit till we just have a normal profit. Okay, and then, we get to this point where, in the long run, remember, we mentioned in the long run we're going to build the perfect size firm where our long run average cost is at its lowest possible point. And we could have had a short run average cost here, short run average cost here, short run average cost here. It's at lowest possible point. And the price is going to be driven down to where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost at that lowest possible point on the long run average cost. So if there's economic profit there, all our friends are going to jump in and try to sell. If we're not making a profit, then firms are going to shut down, stop producing, drive the price up to that point. Okay. All right. Good. How are we feeling? Good. Excellent. Excellent. I feel like I remember it gets easier to go through these as the slides go on. All right. Monopoly. All right. So we did a little review from class 2. And a monopoly is a single seller, one unique product. I can sell it, no one else can. And it's impossible for you to start selling it. I have a monopoly on this product. And we will see that I get to maintain an economic profit because nobody else can jump in and start eating away those profits. Maybe we own a vital resource, maybe there are legal barriers, maybe we have economies of scale. If we have economies of scale, this is called a natural monopoly. So, in quantity of output, cost per unit of output. So, as I'm producing more and more quantity, all right, my cost per unit gets lower and lower and lower. As I build a bigger and bigger factory, I produce at a lower and lower cost. So if I'm here at one firm and Andres wants to jump in and start his firm, he's gonna have to build either a huge factory or at a normal size factory, he's gonna have to produce at a cost of 35 per unit. I'm like, well, I've been in this business 20 years, I've got a huge factory, I can produce at a cost of 15. You can't even get close to me. So that's a natural monopoly. monopolist faces a downward sloping demand curve. So remember, in perfect competition, we face a flat demand curve. We have no say over price if we're in perfect competition. If we're a monopolist, we face a downward sloping demand curve, which means that if I set the price lower, then I increase the quantity demanded. If I set the price higher, I decrease the quantity demanded. All right, so this is the demand curve for my product, my factory. And this red line is the marginal revenue that I face for additional units. And the reason why it's just kind of a variant of the demand curve is, so I could sell one unit to one guy for $150, or I could sell 8 units to 8 people for $50. The problem is, if I sell 8 units, I can't sell to that one guy who would pay $150. I have to sell it to him for $50. So each additional unit I'm selling, I have to sell it to everyone at the same price. So the more units I sell, my marginal revenue goes down further and further. It would be great if I could price discriminate and charge everyone exactly how much they would pay, but assuming I can't do that, my marginal revenue goes down at this kind of steeper rate than the demand curve. Question, how much do I produce? Rule is still the same, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, let's take a look. So, all right, quantity of units, price. All right, this blue line is my demand curve. I face a downward sloping demand curve as a monopolist. This now brown line is my marginal revenue. This red line is my marginal cost. And we still have the same type of thing, diminishing returns. All right, and then if in a fixed factory space, as I produce more and more, my marginal cost for each unit is going to go up and up. And I'm going to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And then guess what? The difference between my average total cost and the price at that point, because this is the demand curve, is my profit. All right, now that's an economic profit. I'm producing way above my average total cost and the price are not exactly the same. So I've got an economic profit. I'm making way more money than I was making at the accounting firm. Can someone jump in and eat away that economic profit? No, because I have a monopoly. So unfortunately, that's good for me. That's not good for society because I'm charging a higher price than society would otherwise be charged, and I'm producing less quantity than society might demand or want of this product. So monopoly, good for the one monopolist, not as efficient for the rest of society because I can maintain that economic profit. So economic profit doesn't sound so good anymore, does it? When you first heard that, you're like, economic profit, normal, or wait a minute. When you first heard normal profit, like zero economic profit, you probably thought, what? Wait, that sucks. Well, this is why economists say it's a good thing. Right? This economic profit is greater than a normal profit. We're not benefiting society by allowing that to stand, by preventing other people from jumping in and creating that perfect equilibrium. Okay. Price discrimination, we talked a little bit about that. It's like, wouldn't it be cool if we could charge everyone what they pay? I think you'd probably have that. Honestly, I don't remember if there's a question about that. But if there is, you've got it, I'm sure. Okay, oligopoly. What is an oligopoly? Kind of like a monopoly, but a few more big producers. It has some characteristics of monopoly, but there's still fierce competition, which is a good thing for us as consumers. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. So first we've got monopolistic competition, and then second we've got oligopoly. Okay, so I gave you the preview on oligopoly, which you already know, but just refreshed you on it. What is monopolistic competition? This is many small sellers, like perfect competition, very slightly differentiated product. And this is reality. I mean, perfect competition is homogeneous product, absolutely no difference in product. So many small sellers, I've just got a small differentiation. My pizza crust is a little bit bigger, a little bit fluffier than Saul's pizza crust down the street. Fairly easy and entry and exit into the market. So let's look at how monopolistic competition with this small differentiation affects those cost curves and the profits. Okay, so remember, this is the demand curve. Remember, we just said a monopolist faces a downward sloping demand curve, and someone in perfect competition faces a flat demand curve. So perfect competition, you have no control over price. All right? You sell at that price, or if you charge higher, you sell nothing. A monopolist can set her or his own price by decreasing it and selling a little bit more, increasing price and selling a little bit less. Monopolistic competition, you just have a slight, is right in between. You're able to control price a little bit because you've got this really cool fluffy crust. But you can't control it as much as a monopolist. You can't charge $400 for your pizza crust. All right, so we've got just a slightly upward sloping demand curve, or downward sloping demand curve. How do we decide what to produce? Where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Same thing. Same. Okay, so let's look at us opening up our pizza shop with our fluffy crust. We know this red line is the marginal cost curve. Same thing, we've got some economies of scale, or not economies of scale, diminishing returns. As we put more and more pizza workers in the kitchen, they start to get in each other's way. All right, it costs us a little bit more to produce, and the marginal cost goes up. We still hit the average total cost at its minimum point. We still produce at where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, now, because we have a slightly downward sloping demand curve, all right, tell me about this marginal revenue curve right here. All right, why is this slightly downward sloping? All right, I'm throwing a lot at you here, so I'll answer that question myself. We have a slightly downward sloping marginal because we do have some control over price. Like we could set price way up here, and we could charge, this person up here would be willing to pay $25 for our pizza. This person down here is only willing to pay $18 for our pizza. So if we set price at 18, we have to charge everybody 18. We can't charge this person 25, although it would be cool if we could. So our marginal revenue decreases as we produce more and more units and sell to people who are willing to buy at a lower and lower cost. All right, we sell where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and then our profit is the difference between the price and our average total cost. Now this is economic profit. What happens when our accounting buddies see economic profit? Like, I'm getting into that business. I can make fluffy crust. I just have a very slightly differentiated product. I don't have a monopoly. My accounting buddy says, you know, my crust is like thin and crispy, and it tastes a little bit better than your fluffy crust. I think I could appeal to that market. So this profit is going to be eaten away. That's the first thing that's going to happen. But we will still have this slightly downward sloping demand curve where we can just capture a little bit more. We can get people to pay a little bit more for our product. So It's not going to be a perfect equilibrium. It's not going to be a perfect straight line. And the other thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have to pay advertising costs to produce with my old friend from accounting who is selling the thin crust. So these are the three things in monopolistic competition. One, advertising costs are going to increase my average total cost. Two, this normal profit is going to be eaten away. And then three, because there's a slight downward sloping demand curve, the consumers are going to pay a little bit more, and I'm going to produce a little bit less. Let's look at that on a graph. Okay, so this long run average cost, it's going to be a little bit higher than it otherwise would be because I have to pay advertising to compete. So the customers are going to pay for that. They're going to pay a little bit more. And because there's just this slightward downward sloping demand curve, I'm going to be able to charge just a little bit more, and I'm going to produce a little bit less. And my long run average cost, if it was down here or down here, it's going to slowly work its way up as more and more people try to compete with me and my fluffy pizza crust. Make sense, Stephanie? Good? Like it? Honest? Good? Excellent. Fantastic. All right, so now we're on to, I believe, oligopoly. All right, so a few big sellers, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint. Hard for anybody else to get into this business. It could be the same product, could be slightly differentiated, very difficult entry. All right, what happens? What are the different models? 4 models we talked about. 1, non-priced competition. I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Better reception. You saw those commercials with that guy, what's his name? The I can hear you now. You know, he's like working for someone else now. The I can hear you now guy? It wasn't, I forget what his name was. You know the I can hear you now from Verizon?
Yeah.
You know that guy? Yeah, he had all those commercials. And now Sprint.
Yeah.
And now he's working for Sprint. he's like, I changed. I now work for Sprint. You should switch to Sprint too. Verizon somehow did not get him on a lifelong contract. I don't know.
And Sprint was smart for picking them up and
Yeah.
keeping them on there.
Yeah.
Because Verizon, everyone can relate to them.
Yeah.
This guy, phone. So.
Yeah. And a lot of people have Verizon and they're disappointed. It was
Yeah.
It cost more. It was great for a minute, but now everybody else is caught up. Why waste your money? So, that fierce competition. We've talked about price leadership, where one company, possibly the biggest company in the industry, will set the price, and then everyone else will just play nice. They'll say, I'm going to set the price right about there, maybe just a little bit lower. Let's not make anybody mad. Let's not start a price war and try to steal their customers. Let me just follow the leader on price. That's one thing oligopolists might do. The other thing they might do is form a cartel and get together in a dark, shady room and say, this is the price we're going to charge. We're going to restrict output, and we're going to keep demand at this level where everyone profits the most. Illegal in the United States, not necessarily illegal elsewhere. And then, in a way, kind of similar to a cartel, we looked at game theory, which I guess you might say a combination of price leadership and cartel. Game theory, we talk about the idea where, okay, Dave and I are the big suppliers in this industry. It would be better for us both if we charge a high price. So I'm charging a high price, I'm making a good profit, he's charging a high price, he's making a good profit, everybody's happy as far as the two of us are concerned. But I'm thinking in my head, what if he lowers his price? Right, then he's going to steal my market share. If he comes out before I even notice it, while I'm on a plane, I get off the plane like, oh, big sale over at David's place. Right, that's going to keep me up at night. I'm going to be worried. So I'm going to think I better make the first move. I better lower the price first. And Dave is up at night thinking the same thing. So what happens often in this game theory is we both end up selling at a lower price because we're scared the other one's going to act first. All right. Excellent. I think we're good there. And I think that's all I wanted to talk about on this. Oh, wait a minute. This is back when I was doing 3 chapters before I 3 chapters of class. That was rough. You all should have told me. Why are you doing 3 classes? 3 chapters of class. All right, so I guess we got to do labor markets. Okay, so supply of labor, this is workers. They're willing to work. Demand, this is factories. So, producers, how much they're willing to pay. The key point here is this marginal product, marginal revenue product. All right, so if I hire one more worker, how much are they going to produce? They're going to build maybe 7 more units. All right, how much can I sell those units for? In fact, actually, I'll go straight to the chart. All right, I hire one more worker. That worker produces 5 more units. I can sell those units for $70. So I have a marginal revenue product of $350. So I would pay $350 for that worker to come to my factory. Like I would. Like in theory, if we've kind of factored out everything, overhead, HR cost, whatever, normal economic profit, I would pay $350 for that first worker. The second worker comes, and she adds a little bit. She adds 4 units, but, space is a little bit limited. We get a diminishing return on marginal product. She produces 4 units. I can sell those for an extra $70. So 70 times 4 would be $280. I would pay $280 for her to come work in my firm. We keep going on down the line until the 5th person I hire produces 1 extra unit. Compared to having 4 workers, if I have 5 workers, I get 1 extra unit, which I sell for $70. So I would pay $70 for that 5th worker. So I put this is the demand curve for labor. So 1 worker, 2 workers, 3 workers, 4 workers, 5 workers. All right, if the price is all the way down to 70, I would hire 5 workers. If the price were 350, I would hire 1 worker. But I wouldn't hire that second worker because I'm only going to get $280 of value out of her. So I'm only going to hire 1. So this is demand curve for labor. This marginal I always get that wrong, marginal revenue product. Yeah, marginal revenue product is the demand curve for labor. And the supply curve for labor is, just how much workers are willing to work based on the wage rate. There's really no formula for that. It's just, we look at it on a macro level. We say how many people are in the market, what are demographic trends, what are their different options, but there's no neat way to calculate it like this. So the supply curve for labor, or this is demand curve for labor, and we know about the supply curve for labor just intuitively. Okay. All right, perfect competition. We have an equilibrium wage. We talked about minimum wage, which gives us unemployment. We won't talk about that now. Okay, so in equilibrium, what do you have? Let's talk about these. Let's talk about these factors really quickly. So we've got the supply of labor, got demand for labor. So let's just go through a process with each of these. So factors causing changes in labor demand. All right, so this is the demand for labor based on marginal revenue product. This is how much the companies are demanding. So unions could change the demand for labor. They could force me to hire more, in which case my demand would increase. What else could unions do? I guess we'll just stop there. Prices of substitute goods. So other things that I could produce If I can produce something else and make more money, what's going to happen to my demand for labor? Decrease. Right? What can we do? All right. Technology. This is an interesting one. All right, if I get to a point where I can produce more with any one worker, like before the first worker could produce 5 units, now I have some better technology, now she can produce 7 units. My demand is going to increase because the more units she's going to be able to produce, my marginal revenue product is going to increase. We're good there? Demand for final products. If people like this product more, that's another way of saying the price increases. So I'm going to demand more labor. If my marginal product of labor increases, like I figure out some way to make the factory more efficient so that first worker, instead of producing 5 units, can produce 6, even without better technology, just because she's able to do more, my demand for her labor is going to increase. We good? Good there? Good there. Good. Factors causing changes in labor supply. All right, so the supply, these are the workers. Then how much labor are they going to supply? The unions could affect this. The unions could say, I guess it's not so much a strike. They could say, yeah, you have to be a union worker. So supply decreases and drives the price, the wage rate up a little bit. So as this decreases, wage rate goes up. All right, I think you get the idea on this. We won't get let's not get lost any further in this unless you have questions on it. You good? You have the idea, you can think through those things? All right. Let's, how are we doing? Are we good to keep going here? Do we need a break yet? I'll tell you what's next and then you can decide. GDP. All right, so this is just final goods and services. We're good? We'll keep going? All right, let's do it. GDP, market value of all final goods and services produced in the nation during a time period. All right, what is our gross domestic product? All right, consists of 4 things. Consumption, investment, government spending, foreign exchange. All right, consumption increases, then we're going to produce and sell more final goods and services. If we're going to invest in more, we're going to produce the things that we need to invest in. We're going to build more buildings. If the government starts spending more money, building more housing units, government-subsidized housing units, or the government the government's at war. You know, we're in the middle of a war, so we need to buy more tanks. The government has more spending. And foreign exchange, if we're able to sell more to different countries, then our GDP is going to go up. All right, C plus I plus G plus net exports. Okay, yada, 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 good. Yeah, let's go over these 4. GDP, national income, personal income, disposable income. GDP, all right, that's goods and services, final goods and services produced in a country over a given time period, usually a year. There's a cost there, right? As we're producing those things, those factories we invested in bear some depreciation, or I guess maybe the car we produced at the beginning of the year lost some value over the year. So our national income is GDP minus that depreciation. So that's how much everyone was producing, how much everyone got. GDP minus depreciation is our national income. Then, how much actually sort of went in the pockets of the people in that economy? Well, national income minus Social Security tax. Disposable income. I guess not. Personal income is not actually went into our pockets. It's just there's 2 steps economists like. First is Social Security tax, and then you take out personal tax, and you get disposable income. So I think was there a question about this on the quiz? I don't remember at this point. If there was, just keep this open and figure out how to calculate this if you need it. Okay, what's the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP? Nominal is in name. It's the actual number. Real GDP is adjust for inflation. All right, let's do an apples to apples comparison. So when we start talking about quote unquote real numbers, even though the nominal number is bigger, you know, the nominal amount you paid, the nominal amount you produced, all right, if we adjust for inflation, how much did we really increase our wealth? How much did we really gain in value? Okay, we use a chain price index to help us compare nominal and real. Now, this chain price index, this is also like the consumer price index. We talked about this idea of a basket of goods. All right, a basket of goods in 2009 cost a certain amount of money. You know, some gasoline, some food, some blue jeans, some rent. All right, and that cost $406 in 2009. So we're going to call that our base year. We're going to say 100% in 2009. In 2008, it cost maybe 97% of that. In 2010, it cost 103% of that. So it's a chain price index, consumer price index, it's all the same. Let's figure out a basket of goods. Let's decide on a base year, and let's use that base year to calculate the difference between nominal and real. All right, so real GDP is our nominal GDP in name, nominal in name, divided by GDP chain price index times 100. If you need to calculate that, just have it open. And I use this example, 2009, the chain price index was 100. In 2000, it was less than 100. In 2013, it was more than 100. And we would expect that with inflation just going up and up a little bit each year. Okay, and that brings us to business cycles. Right, we've got cycles caused by changes in the components of GDP. Consumption goes up, GDP goes up, investment goes up, government spending goes up, export goes up. We've got our economy expanding. GDP is the central measure of the health of our economy. It's not a perfect measure, but it's the core way we will evaluate our economy. So GDP is up, real GDP per up is up. We call that a peak. Starts going down a little bit, we call this a recession. When we hit the bottom of a recession, we call that a trough. And now we're in expansion. GDP is going up. We want to stay in expansion as long as possible. All right, and then what are we going to talk about? I think we might talk about what causes these changes. I forget what we talked about at this point. Peak, recession, depression, trough, recovery. Oh, economic indicators. Okay, what are economic indicators? They're things that tell us if we are we about to be in, were we just in a recession, or an expansion, or a peak, or a trough. A leading economic indicator is something that we can look at, and we can say, based on what's happening with that price of an average home, with that new construction starts, that's going to tell us whether or not we're going to be in recession or expansion 6 months later. If we look at coincident economic indicators, we look at that, what's happening right now. What is the number of new factory orders? What are the number of used goods sales or whatever? That's going to tell us whether we're in expansion or recession right now. And then lagging, what happens after a recession? What happens after an expansion? We look at a lagging economic indicator, and we look back and we say, oh yeah, new factory orders are down. That's because we just came out of an expansion. All right, so we've got leading, coincident, lagging economic indicators to give us an idea of whether or not we're in a recession, expansion, or whatnot. Unemployment. Okay, there are 3 types of unemployment. Frictional, structural, cyclical. So frictional, you just quit your job, or you got fired from your job, maybe you called your boss a bad name, something happened, you just lost your job temporarily, you could easily get another job, so you're frictionally unemployed, you're between things. Structural means you don't have the job skills for the job that you were currently doing, and you need new job skills to do another job. So you've been a coal miner all your life, coal mining industry shuts down, there's no jobs for you, you are structurally unemployed, you're going back to school, you're trying to learn different skills, learn how to be a computer coder in your mother's basement. Structurally unemployed. Cyclically unemployed means you're unemployed because we are in a recession. We're in the bottom cycle of a recession, for example. Full employment. Remember what we call full employment? It is just frictional and just structural. But that's understandable. We're always going to have frictional employment. People moving between jobs, people getting divorced and moving to different cities, whatever. We might have structural unemployment. That's fine. It just means our economy is growing. We're getting rid of a coal industry. We grow, we develop. That's going to happen. Cyclical, we would love to avoid if we could. We always want to be in a boom time as much as possible. So cyclical, if we just have frictional and structural, no cyclical unemployment, all right, the economy is going, gangbusters, we are at full employment, meaning we just have frictional and just have structural unemployment. So suppose the economy is not going gangbusters. We're not in an expansion. We're in a bit of a recession. We have some cyclical unemployment. There we have that concept we call the GDP gap, which is the difference between what GDP we would have earned at full employment, meaning no cyclical unemployment, and the GDP we actually earned. GDP gap is the difference, the amount of cyclical unemployment that takes away from our GDP. Right, I think that is, all right, that's class 4. So we're halfway through, and I think the second half will be a little bit easier. So let's take, I'm gonna take 15. We'll stay. I mean, you don't have to stay. I can have it on the video. If you don't want to go home, you can. But I'll stay, and I'll just go through it in this fashion. So it's gonna take till about 9:15, something like that. So let's take a good 15 minutes. Try to get some fresh eyes, and then we'll come back and finish this off. All right, let's come back at 8:10.